The gala was everything Sarah West had expected, elegant, full of refined people, and buzzing with conversation. The gold and white decor shimmered under the massive chandelier hanging from the ceiling. Guests moved from group to group, exchanging business ideas, networking, and clinking glasses of champagne. Sarah could feel the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with being at these kinds of events. The air smelled of sophistication, but she was here for one thing only: music. Tonight, she was the star. She had spent years perfecting her craft, from hours upon hours of practice to countless concerts where her delicate touch on the piano captivated even the most stoic of critics. Music was her life, her everything. And it was no secret that she had little patience for people who pretended to understand the art without truly appreciating its complexities. Sarah was speaking to an old friend when the subject turned to Elon Musk. The conversation had veered into the territory of pop culture, as it often did at these things, and someone mentioned Elon's latest public appearance, this time at a tech conference, where he reportedly tried to play the piano. The idea made Sarah snort in disbelief. Elon Musk, the tech mogul who had changed the world with Tesla and SpaceX, dabbling in music? Ridiculous. Imagine Elon Musk playing the piano, Sarah said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Her friend, a fellow musician, looked amused. What next? Is he going to start a band? She continued, the words almost tumbling out in a wave of condescension. She could already hear the soft chuckles from the people around her. Her comments were flippant, dismissive even, but she didn't care. She had spent her life perfecting her craft, and the thought of someone like Musk, who had likely never touched a piano seriously, trying to enter the realm she had mastered felt laughable. As she laughed, almost too loudly, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Do you want to find out? Sarah turned around, her face freezing in shock as she saw the man himself standing just a few feet away. Elon Musk. The man whose name had become synonymous with the cutting edge of technology. The man who had made billions off rockets, electric cars, and solar panels. And here he was, standing in front of her, with a half-smile playing on his lips. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The air shifted from light banter to something heavier, like the calm before a storm. Sarah stared at Elon, trying to gauge his tone. Was he joking? Was he actually going to play? She wanted to laugh it off, but the challenge in his voice was too direct to ignore. Elon, she said, trying to recover some semblance of her usual cool composure, I didn't mean. But before she could finish, Elon gave a slight nod toward the grand piano in the corner of the room. Why don't you join me? He asked, his voice smooth, inviting, yet carrying an unmistakable challenge. Sarah's stomach dropped. The piano was situated under a crystal chandelier, a place that drew attention. It was a stage for performance, not a place for idle amusement. She had spent years in concert halls, perfecting every note, every pause. Her performances were the result of thousands of hours of practice, blood, sweat, and tears. The idea of someone, especially Elon Musk, playing in such a setting felt absurd. But there was something in his eyes. He wasn't joking. This wasn't just a joke, a playful throwaway. He was serious. All right, Sarah said, more out of defiance than anything else, if you think you can handle it. With that, she walked confidently over to the piano, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she masked it well. There was no room for fear here, only the sharp focus that had taken her so far. She sat down at the piano and placed her fingers lightly on the keys. The room quieted, anticipation building like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. She needed to show him, no, she needed to show everyone, that this was her world. The piano was where she reigned supreme. And if Elon thought he could come in here and play like he was some kind of virtuoso, he was about to be sorely disappointed. Taking a deep breath, Sarah began her piece. It was one of her favorites, an intricate classical composition by Chopin. She let the music flow, her fingers dancing across the keys with the ease and precision she had perfected over years of practice. The notes sounded clear and powerful, each one building on the last until she was lost in the rhythm. Her body swayed slightly with the movement, the music filling the room, carrying her confidence with it. She finished the piece with a flourish, letting her fingers fall lightly on the final note. There was a moment of silence before the applause erupted around her. She stood and gave a quick, graceful bow, trying to hide the small smirk on her lips. She had done it. She had just shown Elon, and everyone else, exactly why she was the best. But before she could even take a breath, Elon Musk walked up to the piano, his hands casually brushing against the keys as if he had all the time in the world. The room fell silent again, and Sarah felt a flicker of unease in her chest. "All right, Elon," Sarah said, trying to sound nonchalant, though she could feel her pulse quicken. "Let's see what you've got." With no more words, Elon sat at the piano. The crowd had gathered around, some eager to see him fail, others simply curious. Sarah watched, her arms crossed over her chest. This was going to be interesting. But then Elon's fingers touched the keys, and something in the room shifted. It wasn't the clumsy, uncertain start she had been expecting. Instead, his fingers moved fluidly, like they had been playing piano for years. His movements were smooth, confident, each note purposeful. He began to play, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. He wasn't playing something easy or familiar. The piece was intricate, full of rhythm and emotion. It was something that required not just technical skill, but a deep understanding of music. Every note felt like it had been carefully chosen, every transition smooth, every pause filled with intent. Sarah felt her own confidence begin to waver as the music filled the room. The crowd, too, was taken by surprise. People began to murmur amongst themselves, the tension in the air palpable. Sarah tried to stay composed, but the truth was undeniable, Elon Musk was playing like a seasoned pianist. Her mind raced as she watched him. How could this be? She had thought he was just another tech mogul trying to dabble in something he had no business touching. But this? This was impressive. The last note hung in the air for a moment, and the room was silent. The applause came slowly at first, but soon it erupted into a full, overwhelming cheer. Sarah stood there, her mouth slightly agape, her own fingers trembling as she tried to process what had just happened. Elon Musk had not only played the piano, he had played it better than she could have imagined. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt the sting of doubt. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sarah West had always been the kind of person who found comfort in the predictable. The steady rhythm of scales, the unwavering precision of classical music, and the routine of endless practice sessions. Everything she did revolved around her music, every note, every chord, every piece was a piece of herself she gave away to the world. It was how she had been raised and the life she had built for herself, a world where success was measured in effort and perfection, not in the surprise of the unknown. Her journey into music began at the age of 4, when her mother, a former concert pianist herself, had sat Sarah down at a tiny, out-of-tune piano in their living room. Sarah's father, a quiet and introverted professor of literature, was the polar opposite. He never saw the point of pushing Sarah into a single, strict path, he believed in letting her explore. But her mother? She had different plans. She had dreams for Sarah. Dreams that were shaped by her own unfulfilled ambitions. Sarah's earliest memories were of her mother's stern instructions as she struggled to make sense of the keys beneath her small hands. The early years were filled with pain and frustration. She wasn't a natural like some of the prodigies her mother had worked with. It took time, patience, and more than a little bit of stubbornness. But somewhere in those early hours of practice, something clicked. By the age of 16, Sarah had already performed on stages across the country, her technical proficiency drawing admiration and respect. Her concerts were sold-out events, her name one that was synonymous with musical brilliance. But none of that felt as fulfilling as the sound of her fingers moving effortlessly across the keys, each note resonating with her soul. The applause was nice, of course, but it wasn't what drove her. Yet, there was always a part of Sarah that felt she had something to prove. Her mother, despite all her praise and recognition, had always been distant, her high expectations bordering on unreachable perfection. Sarah, eager for approval, constantly pushed herself to achieve more. But her mother, ever the perfectionist, rarely gave the validation Sarah craved. It was this need for validation that made Sarah almost obsessive in her pursuit of musical excellence. While Sarah was determined to meet her mother's impossible standards, she often felt that her relationships with others were secondary. Her friends were few, and most of them had fallen by the wayside as she poured all of her energy into her music. Romantic relationships? They were fleeting at best, as her intense focus on her career left no room for anything else. The few times she had tried to connect with someone on a deeper level, her mother's harsh voice would echo in her mind, reminding her that she couldn't afford distractions. Music, perfection, and success were all that mattered. Despite her achievements, Sarah's identity had become too tightly wound around her career. She was no longer just Sarah, she was the pianist, the virtuoso. It was a role she played perfectly, but it was also a role that had stripped away much of the depth of her personal life. She had always avoided the messy, the unpredictable, the areas of life that required vulnerability and openness. And when Elon Musk came into the picture, when she mocked his musical abilities without a second thought, it was a reminder of just how narrow her view of the world had become. But Sarah's life wasn't always this way. There was a time when she was just a girl with dreams, before the walls of perfectionism and ambition had closed in around her. There was a time when she was a little girl sitting at the piano, not because she had to, but because the music made her feel something more than the world around her. Before she understood that music could be a commodity, a means of social status, a way to get ahead in life. Her first breakthrough came at the age of 12. Sarah had been performing a piece by Chopin, and when she played the final note, something shifted. The audience went silent, not in boredom, but in awe. She had played it with such passion, such emotion, that the usual applause was replaced by a deep, collective breath of admiration. It was the first time Sarah realized that music could speak in ways words never could. It wasn't just about technique or perfection, it was about connection. It was about telling a story. From that moment on, Sarah's life had revolved around that connection, the feeling of being lost in music, the sense of community that came with sharing art. But somewhere along the way, that connection had been overshadowed by the constant drive to be the best. The need for recognition had taken over. Sarah had lost sight of why she played music in the first place. And then, there was the matter of Elon Musk. In the weeks leading up to the gala, Sarah had heard snippets of Elon's unexpected forays into music, rumors that he dabbled with the guitar, even tried his hand at a few chords on the piano. Sarah had scoffed at the idea. She couldn't imagine how a man who had changed the world with rockets and electric cars could have any real understanding of what it meant to truly feel music. She had written him off as a hobbyist, someone who dabbled in a world he didn't belong to. Her initial impression of Elon, based solely on what she had read in the press, was that he was a brilliant inventor, a visionary, no doubt, but a man with his hands in far too many pots to truly excel in any one area. And certainly not in music. That was her domain, the place where she had built her identity and her career. But the gala changed everything. What began as a light-hearted joke about Elon's supposed musical abilities quickly spiraled into something far more significant. As soon as he sat at the piano, playing with unexpected skill, Sarah was forced to confront the limitations of her own perspective. She had made an assumption about him without ever considering the possibility that he might be more than just a tech mogul. She realized, in that moment, that her need to be the best had blinded her to the fact that there were countless paths to mastery. And just maybe, she had underestimated the complexity of other people's experiences. The very idea that she could mock someone based on their talents without even understanding them was unsettling. Elon Musk, a man who had built a global empire, had just shown her a side of himself that she hadn't anticipated. And in doing so, he had forced her to reconsider everything she thought she knew about talent, success, and, most importantly, herself. Sarah didn't know it yet, but that night would mark the beginning of a transformation that would extend far beyond her relationship with Elon. It would push her to reevaluate her own beliefs, her identity, and her purpose in the world. It would challenge everything she had worked for and force her to confront the very things she had spent so many years avoiding. And it would be a journey she couldn't have imagined in her wildest dreams. The days following the gala felt like a haze for Sarah. She couldn't shake the image of Elon Musk sitting at the piano, his fingers gliding effortlessly across the keys. It had been a single performance, but it had left a lasting impression, one that lingered, haunting her. Despite the applause and the praise she had received for her own performance earlier in the evening, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something had shifted inside her. The performance had challenged her in ways she hadn't expected, opening up questions about her own identity and place in the world. Her pride had taken a hit. Sarah had always been in control. She had always believed that mastery came through dedication, hours of practice, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. But Elon had shattered that belief with one impromptu piano performance. The way he played with such ease, the way he seemed to pour his soul into each note, it felt like a reminder that no matter how hard she worked, there were things she could never control. It wasn't just the fact that Elon was talented, it was the way he approached music. To him, it seemed almost like a game, a hobby. He hadn't spent the years in practice that she had, he hadn't sacrificed the same things. His playing was raw, unrefined in a way, but still striking. Sarah hated to admit it, but it made her question everything she had built. That Saturday, Sarah found herself staring at the same grand piano she had performed on at the gala, her fingers hovering over the keys. The sound of Chopin, the piece she had played flawlessly just days before, seemed distant. The notes that had once flowed effortlessly now felt foreign. She had played this piece countless times, but now, with the memory of Elon's unexpected performance fresh in her mind, the music felt different. It felt irrelevant. Was all her training and hard work for nothing? Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone ringing. She glanced at the screen and saw a name she didn't expect to see, Elon Musk. Her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated before answering. Hello. Hi, Sarah. Elon's voice was calm, but there was an underlying warmth to it that surprised her. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. She forced herself to steady her breath. No, not at all. What's up? I wanted to follow up on something from the gala, Elon continued. I know I might have surprised you with my piano playing, didn't mean to throw you off, but I thought we could maybe talk more about it. Maybe even collaborate on something, who knows? Sarah felt the tension in her shoulders. She wasn't sure how to respond. Elon wasn't just talking about music anymore, he was talking about collaboration. And that made her uncomfortable. The idea of working with him, someone who didn't take music seriously, someone who hadn't earned the same kind of recognition, was unsettling. She wanted to brush it off, tell him that it was a nice gesture, but she was too focused on her own career to entertain any distractions. But something inside her stopped her from saying that. Instead, she forced a smile into her voice. I appreciate the offer, Elon. But I've been really focused on my own work. Music is, well, you know, it's personal for me. I'm not sure I'm ready to collaborate with someone outside my circle. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Sarah thought she had lost him. But then, Elon's voice softened. I get it, Sarah, he said, sounding almost apologetic. But I have to say, your playing at the gala was phenomenal. I've seen a lot of talent in my life, but your performance was something else. If you ever change your mind, just let me know. I think we could create something special together. Sarah's mind raced. The words, something special, echoed in her ears. She had worked so hard for everything she had. To think about collaborating with someone like Elon Musk, someone so far removed from the music world, felt wrong. It was like giving up part of herself. But there was a part of her that couldn't quite let go of the possibility. What if Elon had something to offer? What if his approach to music was the missing piece she had been searching for? She hadn't been able to shake the feeling that he had seen something in her playing that no one else had. She hung up the phone, staring at the screen in disbelief. Elon Musk had just invited her to collaborate on something that could change everything. And yet, a sense of unease gnawed at her. The next few days were filled with internal conflict. On the one hand, Sarah wanted to stick to the world she knew, control, structure, and the discipline of years spent practicing in solitude. She wasn't about to let someone like Elon Musk come in and disrupt the delicate balance she had created. On the other hand, the invitation was an opportunity, a chance to push beyond her comfort zone and maybe even discover something new. Maybe he could bring out something in her she didn't know was there. But there was another issue entirely, her pride. She had spent her entire life perfecting her craft, and the idea that someone with no formal training, someone who had made his name in technology, could just waltz in and add something to her world was maddening. It felt like an insult to everything she had worked for. One evening, as she sat at her piano, Sarah began to play the same piece she had performed at the gala. But this time, it felt different. The notes came out slowly, painfully, as if her fingers were no longer in sync with her mind. Each chord rang hollow, the music unrecognizable to her. She stopped abruptly, standing up and pacing the room. "Why does this feel wrong?" she whispered to herself. She had played this piece 100 times. It should have felt like home, like the easiest thing in the world. Was she just too scared to let go of control? Was her fear of failure keeping her from embracing something new? In that moment, Sarah realized that her conflict wasn't about Elon, it was about herself. She had spent so many years building walls around her music, afraid that letting anything else in might ruin it. But perhaps the real challenge wasn't in trying to be perfect. It was about learning to trust the unpredictable, the unknown. It was about embracing change. The next day, she called Elon back. "Maybe we can talk," she said, her voice steady. "Maybe we can figure this out." As the words left her mouth, she couldn't help but wonder if she had just taken the first step towards something she had never imagined. Something that might shake her world to its core. The decision to take that first step into the unknown felt like both a release and a trap to Sarah. She had always been in control, every aspect of her life had been meticulously planned, every note of every piece she played had been practiced to perfection. Now, with Elon Musk entering her world, everything felt chaotic, unpredictable. As she prepared for their first meeting to discuss the potential collaboration, she couldn't shake the anxiety that pulsed in her chest. She had agreed to meet him in a private studio in downtown Los Angeles, a space where artists often came to escape the public eye. It was perfect for what was about to happen, the first time she would sit down with him and figure out what, if anything, they could create together. Sarah arrived early, her fingers tapping nervously on the steering wheel as she parked in front of the building. The place was minimalist, with large windows letting in soft, natural light. She could already hear the faint sound of a piano echoing from inside. Her heart raced in anticipation, but there was also a deep sense of dread. She was about to step into an entirely new realm, one that had the potential to change everything. Inside the studio, she found Elon already seated at a piano, his fingers lightly brushing the keys. The melody was simple but captivating, a stark contrast to the complex pieces she was used to. He wasn't trying to impress her with virtuosity, he was just playing. The music was quiet, almost introspective, like a secret only he and the piano understood. "Sarah," Elon greeted, looking up and offering a smile that was equal parts welcoming and enigmatic. "Glad you could make it." She nodded, hesitating for a moment before walking toward the piano. She had expected a more businesslike approach, a meeting to discuss logistics, but what she saw now was something entirely different. Elon wasn't here to make deals or argue about the details of a project. He was here to play. I wasn't sure what kind of music you were into, Elon said, gesturing toward the piano. So, I thought I'd start with something simple. You know, something we can build on together. It was exactly the kind of unrefined, spontaneous approach that had initially irritated Sarah. But now, as she stood beside him, she realized there was something captivating about it. There was no rush, no pressure. It wasn't about perfection, it was about creation. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah found herself intrigued. She sat down on the bench next to him, her fingers hovering above the keys. There was an awkwardness between them, a tension that neither of them spoke about. Sarah didn't know how to begin. She had spent years performing for packed theaters, but now, in this quiet, intimate setting, the idea of playing felt different. So, what do you have in mind? She asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Elon paused, his hands stilling over the piano keys. I'm not entirely sure yet, he admitted. I think we need to just see where the music takes us. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That wasn't exactly a helpful answer. But as she looked at him, something shifted in her. There was no pressure to be perfect. There was no demand for immediate brilliance. Elon was giving her space to simply create. The realization startled her. She took a deep breath and began playing, her fingers moving gently over the keys. The piece wasn't complicated, just a few flowing chords that felt more like an exploration than a performance. Elon joined in after a moment, his own fingers dancing over the lower keys, playing with a rhythm that was lighter and more free than anything she had ever composed. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They weren't trying to show off their skills or create something monumental. It was, for lack of a better word, playful. And that's when it hit her, this was the beauty of it. For the first time in a long while, Sarah wasn't performing, she was simply playing. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to be the best. The music was enough. And in that moment, she realized that she had been so focused on perfection for all these years that she had forgotten why she started playing in the first place, to experience the joy of creation, to feel the music, to let go of control. They played for hours, exploring different melodies, creating harmonies, and discovering new ways to blend their sounds together. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't seamless. There were moments of awkwardness, of hesitation, but it didn't matter. The magic was in the process, in the willingness to fail and try again, to stumble and pick each other up. It was nothing like the polished, rehearsed concerts Sarah was used to. There were no final bows, no applause. But in that small, intimate studio, Sarah found something far more valuable, freedom. When they finally stopped, both of them were breathless, their faces flushed with the excitement of discovery. Elon leaned back against the piano, grinning like a kid who had just figured out how to solve a puzzle. That was unexpected, he said, still smiling. But I think we're onto something here. Sarah couldn't help but laugh, the sound bubbling out of her like something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It wasn't a laugh of triumph or superiority, it was the kind of laugh that came when you finally realized that maybe, just maybe, you didn't have to be perfect to be truly good at something. Maybe, just maybe, the imperfections were what made it beautiful. She looked at Elon, her eyes softened. Yeah. I think we are. As Sarah left the studio that night, her mind was buzzing with possibilities. What had started as a simple collaboration had opened up a world she had never imagined. She had always prided herself on her dedication to perfection, but in just a few short hours, she had learned that sometimes, the pursuit of perfection could hold you back. There was beauty in imperfection, in spontaneity, in the unexpected moments of joy that emerged when you allowed yourself to let go of control. But even as she walked to her car, a small seed of doubt began to take root. Was this the right path? She had spent so many years building a career that was defined by perfection. Could she really let go of that and embrace a more unpredictable, less structured approach? Could she trust herself enough to do that? The questions lingered in her mind, but one thing was clear: Sarah West was no longer just a pianist. She was an artist, open to the infinite possibilities of creation, ready to embrace the unknown. And this was only the beginning. The days following their first session were a blur for Sarah. She felt as though she had crossed a threshold, one that she couldn't undo. The creative energy that had sparked between her and Elon in that studio seemed to grow with each passing day, filling her thoughts, her dreams, her very being. But there was something else, something far more unsettling. The more she embraced this new, unstructured way of making music, the more she feared she was losing control of the one thing she had always depended on: her identity as a serious, disciplined musician. Sarah spent hours replaying their impromptu compositions, trying to decipher what had happened that day. What had drawn her in so completely? Was it the freedom to explore without the burden of perfection? Or was it the strange sense of connection she had felt with Elon, as though they had unlocked something deep inside each other through music? Either way, she couldn't stop thinking about it. That Friday, Elon invited her to a more formal meeting to discuss their collaboration. But as she prepared for it, Sarah found herself grappling with a conflict that she hadn't anticipated: doubt. She stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, adjusting her blouse. Her reflection seemed like a stranger. She had always prided herself on presenting a polished, professional image. But today, she didn't feel that way. She felt raw. She felt uncertain. The world she had known was slowly slipping away, and there was a part of her that didn't know how to handle it. Elon's world, his unfiltered, boundary-pushing mindset, was seductive, and Sarah knew that he wasn't going to let her retreat back into the safety of her old ways. He would challenge her. He would demand more of her than she was ready to give. Arriving at the upscale office building where Elon's team worked, Sarah's hands shook slightly as she stepped into the elevator. The walls of the elevator were adorned with photographs of various projects Elon had led: space programs, electric cars, and even cutting-edge technology that seemed light years away from her music world. She couldn't help but feel like she didn't belong here. When the doors opened to the penthouse suite, Elon was already waiting, casually leaning against the edge of a modern desk. His presence was commanding, yet disarmingly calm. He smiled when he saw her, as if the nerves she felt weren't even a part of his world. He gestured toward the seating area. "Sarah, I'm glad you could make it. Come in, sit down. We have a lot to talk about." His tone was easy, relaxed, as if the pressure she was feeling was invisible to him. As she sat down, Sarah noticed a subtle shift in the air between them. The meeting had changed. The playful experimentation with music had given way to something more serious, more demanding. Elon wasn't here to just play anymore. This was business. He had a vision. And she was part of it. He leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "I want to take our collaboration to the next level. We've got something unique here. We could create something groundbreaking, something that blends the boundaries of classical music and the technology world. Think about it. A symphony designed not just for the stage, but for the future. What if we created something that could reshape how people experience music? A fusion of your classical mastery and my vision of innovation." Sarah felt her heart race. She wasn't sure what Elon saw in her music. His focus was always on the future, on the unknown, on bending the rules to create something new. And she? She had always been tethered to the past, to tradition. I'm not sure," she began, struggling to find the right words. "I've spent my entire career on perfecting a craft that's grounded in history. Classical music is rooted in precision, in the careful study of past masters. I'm not sure if I can just let go of that." Elon's eyes softened, but his expression remained steady. "I understand your hesitation, Sarah. But what if the boundaries of classical music aren't as fixed as we think? What if tradition can coexist with innovation? The two can enhance each other. It's not about replacing one with the other, it's about finding a way to weave them together." We could build something that is timeless and yet ahead of its time. His words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. But Sarah felt a wave of unease. What he was proposing felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked for. She had spent her life learning the rules of music, understanding the structure, the intricacies, and the history that made it so powerful. Was she really ready to abandon that for something she couldn't fully understand? The room grew quiet as Sarah sat there, grappling with the magnitude of his vision. And then, Elon leaned forward once again. His voice dropped, more serious now. Sarah, I'm asking you to trust me. Trust the process. Trust that this collaboration, could change everything. You've already taken a huge step by working with me. And I'm not asking you to give up your past. I'm asking you to bring it into the future with me. The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. He wasn't just asking her to collaborate. He was asking her to jump off a cliff with him, into the unknown. And in that moment, she realized something deep within herself. She had been afraid of change, afraid of taking risks, afraid of failing. And that fear had kept her tied to the past. I'm scared, Elon, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I've spent so many years trying to be perfect, trying to live up to what people expect from me. What if this doesn't work? What if I lose myself in this process? Elon's gaze softened, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of vulnerability in him. He wasn't the unflappable genius anymore. He was just a man, sharing in her fear. You won't lose yourself, he said quietly. You'll find a part of yourself you didn't know existed. That's the beauty of it. You'll see. The sincerity in his voice struck something deep in Sarah. It was like a crack opening in her heart, one that allowed the possibility of change to seep in. That night, as Sarah walked back to her car, she felt like she had just taken a leap. The fear that had gripped her earlier was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. She knew what she needed to do. The future, for the first time, seemed full of endless possibilities. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It had been 2 weeks since that pivotal meeting with Elon. During that time, Sarah had gone through a whirlwind of emotions, vacillating between moments of clarity and bursts of doubt. Every time she thought about the direction they were heading in, her heart would race with both excitement and fear. She had agreed to go forward with the collaboration, but something inside her still wondered whether she was making the right choice. Yet, as she sat at her piano late one evening, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating the room, she found herself revisiting the work they had done together. The compositions they had created were nothing like anything she had ever played before, an unpredictable blend of classical harmony and technological innovation, the very essence of what Elon had promised her. She started playing one of their pieces again, the one they had worked on during that first meeting. It was raw, untamed, but beautiful. The piano's notes mingled with layers of electronic sound that she'd never imagined would fit together so seamlessly. In that moment, Sarah realized something that had eluded her for so long: music was not a destination. It was a journey, one that had endless possibilities if she was willing to embrace change, challenge herself, and take risks. As she played, she let the sound wash over her, grounding her in the now. The tension that had knotted in her chest for weeks began to ease. She wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but she knew she couldn't stay stuck in the past. The music, in all its imperfections, was a reflection of her own evolution. The next morning, Sarah met with Elon again, but this time, there was no hesitation in her. She walked into the room with a newfound sense of determination, ready to continue the collaboration with an open heart and mind. "Hey, Sarah," Elon greeted her, his smile wide, his energy as infectious as ever. "I've been thinking about the direction we're going in. I think we're about to take this to the next level." Sarah smiled back, feeling a spark of the same excitement. The uncertainty was still there, but it no longer held her back. She was ready. I think I'm finally starting to get it, Sarah said, her voice firm, yet filled with anticipation. This isn't about abandoning who I am as a musician. It's about growing beyond what I thought was possible. I want to keep pushing, keep exploring. Let's see where this goes. Elon's eyes lit up, the genuine excitement radiating from him. That's exactly what I hoped to hear. The rest of the meeting was filled with brainstorming, planning, and exchanging ideas that felt like magic in the making. There was a shared understanding between them now, a deep connection forged through their willingness to risk everything for the sake of creativity. No longer was it just about combining technology and music. It was about creating something that could resonate with the world in ways they couldn't even yet fathom. As the days turned into weeks, the collaboration took on a life of its own. They were creating music for the future, something groundbreaking. There were times of frustration, of course, when they hit dead ends or struggled to get a particular sound just right. But every setback was met with resilience, each challenge bringing them closer to something extraordinary. And Sarah was changing. Slowly, piece by piece, the doubts that had plagued her began to fade. She was becoming someone new, someone who wasn't afraid to take risks, who wasn't afraid to let go of perfection in favor of something more raw, more real. The rigid structure she had held onto for so long gave way to something more fluid. She was learning to trust the process, to trust the unknown. One evening, after a particularly successful session, Sarah sat down with Elon to reflect on how far they had come. The studio was quiet now, the sound of their instruments fading into the background as they relaxed on the couches. "You know, I was thinking," Sarah began, her voice softer now, "I used to think that music was about being perfect. That every note had to be just right. But now, I see that it's more about the journey. The moments in between, the mistakes, the improvisation. That's where the magic happens." Elon nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I think you've hit the nail on the head. Sometimes, we get so caught up in perfection that we forget why we started in the first place. Music is about expression. It's about connecting with others, about telling a story. Perfection can't always tell a story, it's the imperfections that make it real." Sarah smiled, the weight of her earlier fears finally lifting. She had found her new path, and it was more freeing than she had ever imagined. Music was no longer about a flawless performance or about meeting expectations, it was about creating something that felt alive, something that could speak to the soul. That night, as Sarah walked out of the studio, she took a deep breath and looked up at the starry sky. She had no idea what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. She had taken the leap, and she was still standing. She had embraced change and trusted her instincts. And she had come out on the other side stronger, wiser, and more open to the infinite possibilities of life and art. As she got into her car, she couldn't help but think about what Elon had said to her in that first meeting, the words that had stuck with her ever since: trust the process. Trust that this could change everything. She had trusted him, and in doing so, she had trusted herself. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Elon continued their collaboration, pushing the boundaries of what they could create. The music they produced was unlike anything anyone had ever heard before, blending classical elements with futuristic sounds in a way that was entirely unique. It resonated deeply with listeners, touching hearts and minds in ways that transcended genres. Sarah's journey had come full circle. What began as a doubt-filled venture into the unknown had transformed her into an artist unafraid of imperfection, unafraid of the future, and unafraid of herself. She had learned that sometimes, the greatest breakthroughs in life come from the willingness to embrace the unknown, to step away from the rigid rules that bind us, and to trust that the process will lead us somewhere unexpected, and beautiful. As weeks passed, Sarah's transformation from a classical pianist to an experimental artist continued to unfold. Each session with Elon seemed to bring something new, an idea, a sound, a connection that hadn't existed before. Her life, once so predictable, was now filled with the spontaneous and unpredictable. She had come to embrace that sense of uncertainty, letting it guide her, pushing her to create art in ways she'd never considered. But there was one thing Sarah didn't expect: the world was watching. One day, Elon called her with an unexpected proposition. He had been talking to his team, and they were interested in showcasing some of their work on a global scale. He wanted Sarah to join him for a high-profile event, something that would blend their unique style of music with cutting-edge technology in front of an international audience. A performance, live-streamed, broadcasted, and covered by media from all over the world. "You're asking me to perform in front of thousands?" Sarah's voice trembled, despite the excitement bubbling inside her. The thought of stepping onto such a massive stage was both thrilling and terrifying. "But I'm still not sure if I'm ready for that kind of spotlight. Elon, I'm not a pop star. I've always been a musician who stayed out of the public eye. I play for the love of music, not for the fame." "I understand, Sarah," Elon said, his tone both reassuring and firm. "But this isn't about fame, it's about taking music to a place it's never been before. It's about breaking boundaries. You're ready for this. You just don't know it yet. Trust me." Sarah thought about it for a long moment. She had been slowly stepping outside her comfort zone, but this was different. This wasn't just about trying something new in the safety of a studio or a small crowd. This was going to be a global platform. People from all walks of life, across continents, would watch her performance. The pressure was monumental. But then, Sarah remembered something Elon had told her early on: trust the process. And in that moment, she realized that maybe the process wasn't just about the music, it was about her journey as an artist. It wasn't about playing it safe. It was about diving into the unknown with her whole heart. "I'll do it," she said, the words coming out of her mouth before she could second-guess herself. "Let's do this." The weeks leading up to the performance were a blur of rehearsals, planning, and preparation. Elon and his team worked tirelessly to create a visual experience that would complement the music they had been developing. It was going to be unlike anything anyone had ever seen before: holographic projections, interactive soundscapes, and lighting that would evolve in real time with the music. It was a fusion of sound, vision, and technology that would push the boundaries of what a live performance could be. But Sarah still had her doubts. Even as they neared the day of the performance, she felt the familiar weight of nervousness creeping back into her chest. She was about to step onto a stage larger than any she had ever imagined. What if she froze? What if she wasn't good enough? One night, a few days before the event, she found herself in the practice space alone. The room was silent except for the sound of her fingers gently tapping the keys of the grand piano, lost in her thoughts. The pressure was overwhelming, and the isolation was suffocating. She closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her, but no matter how much she played, it didn't feel like it was enough. That was when Elon walked in, his footsteps soft but steady. He had a rare seriousness about him, and Sarah felt his presence without looking up. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the silence. "You're going to crush this." She laughed bitterly, still not meeting his eyes. "You keep saying that, but I'm not so sure. I've spent my whole life hiding behind the music, behind the notes. I've never been in the spotlight like this. What if I fail?" Elon sat down beside her, his usual confidence tempered with a deep understanding. "Do you remember the first time we made music together? You had no idea what to expect, no idea how it was going to sound, but you took a chance. And look where we are now. You've already done the hard part. You've embraced the unknown." Sarah let out a long breath, the tension in her shoulders starting to loosen. "But that was different. This is real. This is everything." Elon looked her square in the eyes. "And that's why you're ready. Because this is real. It's going to be raw. It's going to be challenging. And yes, it's going to be hard. But you can't walk away from this now, not after everything we've done. Trust yourself. Trust the music. The world needs to hear it. And the world needs to hear you. Sarah sat quietly for a moment, letting his words sink in. She knew he was right. This wasn't just about playing the notes perfectly. This was about sharing something real with the world, something that couldn't be rehearsed or controlled. It was about vulnerability, creativity, and the willingness to step into the unknown. "I'm scared," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I'm ready." The night of the performance arrived, and Sarah stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. The stage before her was a vast expanse, with lights flashing and the hum of anticipation vibrating through the floor. Elon stood beside her, looking as calm as ever. But Sarah could see the glint of excitement in his eyes. As they took their positions on stage, she felt a surge of adrenaline. The crowd was massive, filling the arena with energy and expectation. But for the first time in her life, Sarah wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't paralyzed by fear. Instead, she was present. She was focused. And she was ready. The first notes of the composition rang out through the arena, the sound blending with the projections of light and holograms that filled the space. The music was a blend of classical grace and futuristic sounds, a reflection of Sarah's journey. As the performance unfolded, Sarah could feel the connection between the music, the technology, and the audience. She was no longer just playing notes, she was telling a story of transformation, of overcoming fear, and of embracing the unknown. By the time the performance reached its peak, the crowd was on its feet, cheering, clapping, and calling for more. The raw emotion that Sarah had poured into her music resonated with every single person in the room. It was one of those rare moments when art transcended the performer, it became a shared experience, a collective journey of discovery. As the last note echoed through the venue, Sarah stood at the piano, breathless but elated. The applause was deafening, and for the first time in her career, she didn't feel the need to hide. She felt exposed, yes, but also liberated. Elon was beside her, a proud smile on his face. "You did it," he said quietly. "You really did it." For Sarah, that moment was everything. It was the culmination of her journey, her growth as an artist, as a person. She had stepped into the unknown, faced her fears, and come out stronger on the other side. And she knew now, more than ever, that the journey was just beginning. The applause from the live performance still echoed in Sarah's ears, even days later. It was a blur. A whirlwind of flashing lights, rising excitement, and a raw connection with the audience that she had never experienced before. But as the world outside continued to buzz with praise and attention, Sarah found herself retreating into a quieter space, a space where the pressure of the spotlight didn't feel so intense. She sat in her studio, the keys of the piano cool beneath her fingers, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to perform for anyone. It was just the music in her, just as it had been when she started. The fame and success that came with the performance were overwhelming at times, but they didn't define her. It was the music that mattered. "Elon's been talking to the press all day," Sarah mused to herself, her thoughts wandering. "And people are starting to take notice. This is real." Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Elon. "Sarah, you're a star. You changed everything tonight. But I need you to stay grounded. The real challenge is what comes next. We need to keep evolving." The message was both encouraging and a little daunting. The press was already calling her a pioneer, a new kind of musician, part classical prodigy, part tech innovator. The headlines read, "Sarah Williams, the artist who blended music and technology like no one before." The attention was flattering, but it felt like a weight on her shoulders. What if the next step didn't live up to the hype? What if she couldn't meet the expectations? A knock on her door startled her out of her reverie. She opened it to find Elon standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee, a look of determination in his eyes. "Hey," he said casually, stepping inside. "How's the brain trust holding up?" Sarah chuckled, taking one of the cups from him. "Brain trust? More like brain overload. Elon smiled but immediately got serious. I know what you're feeling. This kind of success, it's all-consuming. But you're not alone in this, Sarah. You've got a team now, a vision that's bigger than any single performance. Don't lose sight of the bigger picture. Sarah paused, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of the coffee cup. I know. It's just, this all feels so sudden. One minute I'm just doing my thing, and the next, I'm everywhere. That's the beauty of it, though. You didn't try to fit into a mold. You didn't just play the game, you rewrote the rules. This isn't about fame or recognition, it's about pushing the boundaries of art itself. The fact that people are paying attention is just the beginning. She nodded, letting his words sink in. But what if I don't know where to take it next? What if I'm not ready for the next big leap? Elon's expression softened, a rare vulnerability in his eyes. You don't have to have all the answers. No one does. The next step will reveal itself when the time is right. You're already more ready than you realize. Just don't lose that spark, Sarah. Don't let the world tell you who you should be. For a moment, they both just stood there, in the quiet of the studio, letting the weight of the conversation settle. Sarah realized that what Elon was saying wasn't just about music, it was about life. He was giving her permission to not have all the answers, to take things one step at a time, and to trust in her instincts. The next few months passed in a blur of creative exploration and collaboration. Sarah's new music began to push the boundaries of what had previously been considered possible. She worked with artists, engineers, and technologists to develop a sound that was truly revolutionary. Elon continued to be her biggest champion, offering support and guidance when she doubted herself, reminding her that they were in this together. But despite the excitement, Sarah couldn't help but feel a strange sense of isolation. The more the world focused on her, the more she craved the quiet moments that had once defined her creative process. She missed the days when the music had been her only focus, when her biggest challenge was finding new ways to express herself through the keys of her piano. One evening, after a long day of recording, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, her fingers drumming lightly on the table. She thought about the road she had traveled, the changes she had undergone, and the new world she found herself a part of. There was no going back now. The spotlight had found her, and it wasn't letting go. But the question lingered in her mind, was this the life I wanted? Her phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a message from her mother. I saw your performance last night. You were amazing, honey. But don't forget, you're still my Sarah. The girl who just wants to play piano in her room and make music she loves. Don't lose that. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she read the message. It was a reminder of who she truly was, before the fame and the pressure. Before the world started dictating how she should think, feel, and create. She took a deep breath, her fingers still trembling as she placed the phone down. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She reached out to Elon and told him she needed a break. A real one. She needed to step away from the constant media requests, the relentless cycle of performances, and return to what had brought her here in the first place, the music. She needed time to breathe, to reflect, and to reconnect with her purpose. To her surprise, Elon supported her decision without hesitation. Take all the time you need, he told her. The music will still be here when you're ready. Sarah's retreat was not long, but it was enough. She spent days at the piano, rediscovering the joy of playing for herself. She focused on composing music that was raw, personal, and stripped of all outside influence. The more she immersed herself in this quiet process, the more she realized that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She had already done that. The time away from the spotlight allowed Sarah to see her own evolution clearly. She had grown not just as an artist, but as a person. She had learned to trust her instincts, to embrace the unknown, and to challenge the expectations of the world. But most importantly, she had learned that the art she created was hers to define. The world's opinions were just noise, her own voice was the one that mattered most. When she returned to the studio, she was ready. She wasn't afraid of the spotlight anymore, because she knew it didn't define her. What mattered was the music, the journey she was on, and the story she wanted to tell. Sarah's return to the studio after her brief retreat was like stepping into a familiar world with fresh eyes. The pressure of the spotlight, while still ever present, no longer carried the same weight. She had learned something vital during her time away: her art didn't need validation from anyone but herself. It was a liberating realization. The music was hers, first and foremost, and the world could take it or leave it. Her first few days back were spent in solitude, letting the music breathe. She returned to the basics, playing the piano as she had before all the fame, before Elon, before the technology. It was just her and the keys, and in those quiet moments, Sarah could finally hear her own voice again. But this time, it was different. The melodies flowed easier, the rhythms felt freer, and the emotions were more profound. She had something to say, something deeper than ever before. Elon continued to check in, but he respected her space. Sarah appreciated that. He knew how important this time was for her. The world, after all, could wait. She wasn't running from the opportunities she had created, but rather taking the time to refine them, to make sure they were true to her core. Sarah, Elon said one day as he walked into the studio, his tone lighter than usual. I've been hearing whispers. People are saying you're a changed artist, more focused, more intentional. Is that true? She looked up from the piano, a faint smile on her lips. Maybe. I think I'm finally realizing what matters. Elon leaned against the doorframe, watching her with an intensity she had come to recognize. You know, you've started a movement. The music world is watching, Sarah. And more importantly, they're listening. What's next? Sarah paused, fingers resting on the keys, her thoughts swirling. What's next? She repeated his words, letting them roll around her mind. For the first time, she didn't feel an immediate pressure to answer. What was next wasn't a question for the world to dictate, it was a question for her to answer, on her own terms. What's next is a new kind of music. A kind of music that tells the truth. Not just about me, but about the world, the future, and what we're all going through. It's time to shift perspectives. Elon raised an eyebrow. Shift perspectives. Sounds ambitious. But I'm in. What's your vision? Sarah stood up from the piano and walked to the large window, looking out over the city that had become her home. The sky was painted with the soft hues of the setting sun, and she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. I want to create something that connects people, not just through sound, but through their shared humanity. I want to write music that speaks to people's souls, that invites them into the conversation, that makes them feel something they've never felt before. Elon stood next to her, his presence supportive but respectful. He knew this was her moment, her vision. He didn't need to push anymore. You're onto something powerful, Sarah. Whatever you create next, I'm with you. Sarah smiled, turning back to the piano. It's not about perfection, Elon. It's about emotion. It's about vulnerability. People don't need more polished, pre-packaged art. They need something real, something raw. I want to give them that. The next few months were a whirlwind of creative exploration. Sarah poured herself into her work, drawing on the emotions, fears, and hopes that had shaped her over the years. She began experimenting with even more unconventional sounds, blending organic piano with synthesized elements, and layering voices in ways she had never imagined. The music became a reflection of her own evolution, an honest portrayal of the tumultuous journey she had been on. The world, of course, was paying attention. The media was constantly reporting on her every move, analyzing her music, speculating on her next big project. Yet, for Sarah, the noise of the world had faded into the background. She no longer felt the need to satisfy the demands of the press or the public. She was creating for herself, and that was enough. But as the time came to release her new work, there was still a lingering doubt in her mind. Would people understand? Would they accept this new sound, this new direction? She had already defied expectations once, but could she do it again? The night before the release, Sarah sat alone in her studio, her fingers hovering over the keys. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. She had come so far, and yet there was still a part of her that feared rejection. Elon had been supportive throughout the process, always reminding her that the music would speak for itself. But tonight, she was alone with her thoughts, and the weight of the moment was heavy. Taking a deep breath, Sarah finally pressed down on the keys. The first notes of her new composition filled the room, and for the first time in weeks, she felt at peace. This was her truth. This was the music that had been waiting to be heard. The morning of the release, Sarah's phone buzzed incessantly. Notifications from fans, industry insiders, and journalists flooded in. She had already prepared herself for the inevitable pressure, but she found herself staring at the screen for a long time before picking up the phone. Would they like it? Would they get it? Her finger hovered over the screen as she opened a message from Elon. It was short, as usual, but powerful. It's not about them. It's about you. Stay true. You've got this. Sarah smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. She wasn't doing this for the recognition. She was doing it because it was who she had become, and that, in itself, was enough. She closed her eyes and pressed play. The release went live, and within hours, the world was abuzz. The reactions were varied, as expected. Some hailed it as a masterpiece, a new era of music, while others struggled to understand the direction she had taken. But Sarah wasn't concerned with the critics. She had made something that felt right. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And in that honesty, she found her peace. As the days passed, the world continued to watch, and more people began to connect with the message behind her music. It wasn't about the sound alone, it was about what it represented: vulnerability, authenticity, and a new way of seeing the world. Sarah had done what she set out to do. She had shifted perspectives. Sarah's release had sent ripples through the music industry. It wasn't just the sound that had captured attention, it was the message, the courage to step outside the boundaries, to challenge the norm, to express vulnerability through art in a way that hadn't been done before. Her music became an anthem for those who craved something real, something raw. People were listening, not just with their ears, but with their hearts. The press was relentless. Interviews, reviews, and features flooded in from all corners of the globe. Sarah had become a symbol of something new, something revolutionary. It was no longer about being a piano prodigy or a tech visionary. It was about being an artist, pure and simple. As Sarah navigated this new phase of her career, she found herself at a crossroads. The attention, while validating, was also overwhelming. For the first time in a long while, she questioned what she truly wanted. The world was watching, but did she even want to be the center of it all anymore? Was this the path she was meant to follow? Sitting in her studio one afternoon, Sarah stared at the piano keys, deep in thought. Elon had been encouraging, always pushing her to embrace the spotlight, to seize the opportunities that came with it. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she didn't need to keep chasing the next big thing. She had already created something monumental. Now, it was time for her to decide how she wanted to move forward. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from her mother. "Saw your latest release. It's beautiful, sweetheart. You've come a long way. Just remember, don't forget who you are along the way. Stay true to yourself. The world will catch up eventually." Sarah smiled, a wave of warmth washing over her. Her mother's words were a constant reminder of the quiet strength she had always carried. It wasn't about the fame or recognition. It was about creating something that mattered, something that could touch lives. Taking a deep breath, Sarah made a decision. She called Elon. "Hey," Elon answered, his voice calm but attentive. "What's on your mind?" "I think I need to step back," Sarah said, her words careful but firm. "Not from the music, but from everything else. From the interviews, the media circus, the pressure. I want to make music on my own terms. I don't want to just be the next big thing. I want to be something more." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Elon was silent for a moment before responding, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "I understand. You've been through a lot, Sarah. And you've done more than most could ever dream of. If stepping back is what you need to do, then do it. Just remember, the world still needs what you have to offer. Don't lose sight of that." Sarah nodded, even though Elon couldn't see her. "I won't. I just need to find my center again. I need to get back to the music. To the real reason I started all of this in the first place." Elon's voice softened. "Take all the time you need. But just know, you don't have to do this alone. I'm here, and I'll always have your back." With Elon's support, Sarah took the time she needed. She returned to her roots, spending long hours at the piano, composing music that wasn't shaped by external expectations but by her own inner truth. She wrote about love, loss, fear, and hope, emotions she hadn't fully explored before. Each composition felt like a part of her soul laid bare, and with every note, she rediscovered the magic of creating for the sake of creation itself. Meanwhile, the world continued to buzz around her. Her music was still making waves, and her fans were eager for more. But for Sarah, it was no longer about fulfilling anyone's expectations. She had already done that. Now, it was about following her heart. During this time, Sarah's relationship with Elon also deepened. They were no longer just collaborators, they had become close friends, confidants who understood each other in ways that others couldn't. Elon, ever the visionary, had always been the one to push boundaries, but he respected Sarah's desire for balance. He was the driving force behind the technology, the machine that powered the innovative aspects of her work, but Sarah was the heart of it all. Together, they had found something special. One evening, as the sky outside her studio turned a dusky pink, Sarah received a message from Elon. "You're ready." She read the message twice, letting it sink in. Ready for what? To step back into the world? To make the next big leap? Her heart raced as the weight of the words settled in. She was ready, but ready for what? That night, Sarah sat at the piano once again, her fingers dancing over the keys as if they had a life of their own. The music flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a profound sense of clarity. She didn't need the world to tell her what to do next. She had already discovered it within herself. The next step would come when it was meant to. As the weeks passed, Sarah began to quietly release new compositions, ones that were deeply personal, reflective, and raw. They were pieces that spoke to her journey, her growth, and her newfound sense of purpose. The response from her fans was overwhelmingly positive, but Sarah wasn't concerned with the praise anymore. She was creating because she had to, because it was the truest form of expression she knew. Then, one day, Elon called her again. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice thoughtful. "What if we bring the music to people in a new way? What if we create a live experience, not just a performance, but an interactive experience that allows your fans to truly feel what you're feeling when you play?" Sarah leaned back in her chair, intrigued by the idea. "You mean like a live, immersive performance? Something where they can interact with the music, the visuals, everything?" "Exactly," Elon replied. "It's time to take it to the next level. We've pushed boundaries with technology before, but now it's time to blend it with your music in a way that's never been done before. A full sensory experience. What do you think?" Sarah smiled, a spark of excitement flickering in her chest. "Let's do it." Let's show the world what it means to truly feel the music. And just like that, Sarah and Elon began planning their most ambitious project yet, a live, interactive performance that would combine music, technology, and immersive experiences in ways that had never been imagined before. The world would have to wait, but when it came, it would be more than anything anyone could have ever expected. The journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. The months leading up to the live immersive performance were some of the most intense Sarah had ever experienced. Elon, as always, was a whirlwind of ideas, pushing the limits of technology and creativity to bring the vision to life. But Sarah was just as determined, infusing every aspect of the performance with her essence, her soul, her music. She wasn't just designing a show. She was creating an experience that would invite people to see the world the way she saw it, raw, vulnerable, and connected. They had built an entire world for this event. It wasn't just a concert, it was a journey. The audience would walk through a landscape of sound, touch, and visuals, each step taking them deeper into the emotional heart of Sarah's music. It would start with a soft, intimate piano piece, and as the audience moved through the space, the sounds would grow, becoming more layered, more complex, mirroring Sarah's own growth as an artist. Every corner, every light, every shadow would play a part in the story. For Sarah, this was the culmination of everything she had worked for. This wasn't about impressing anyone or proving anything anymore. This was about inviting people into her world and letting them experience it as she had, raw, unfiltered, and real. But as the night of the premiere approached, a familiar anxiety began to settle in. What if they didn't get it? What if the world, once again, rejected her vision? Her fingers hovered over the piano keys, her mind racing. Elon had always told her to trust herself, to trust her art, but the pressure of the moment was undeniable. "I don't know if I can do this, Elon," she said one evening as she sat in the studio, the weight of the final rehearsal on her shoulders. Elon was sitting across from her, his expression unusually soft. "You already have, Sarah. You've already created something that's changing everything. This isn't about doing it perfectly. It's about doing it your way." She sighed, staring at the piano. "But what if my way isn't enough? What if they don't understand?" "They will," Elon replied, his voice calm but certain. "Because you're doing something that no one else is brave enough to do. And that's why it matters. People will feel it, Sarah. They'll see it. You don't need to explain it, you just need to let them experience it." Her breath caught in her throat. Elon's words were like a lifeline, pulling her out of the storm of doubt that had been swirling in her mind. She had already come so far. She had already done the hard part. Now, it was time to let go. The night of the performance, the venue was a magnificent blend of technology and art. It was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. The audience filtered in slowly, whispering in awe as they walked through the immersive space, each part of the experience pulling them deeper into Sarah's world. The lights shifted with the rhythm of her music, colors blending and morphing as the sound evolved from the delicate, intimate tones of the piano to the powerful, symphonic layers she had crafted. The experience was designed to make them feel as though they were not just listening to the music, but living it. When Sarah took the stage, the room fell into a hushed silence. For a brief moment, it felt like the world stood still. She was no longer the artist they had once known, the piano prodigy, the tech visionary. She was simply Sarah. And tonight, she was playing for herself. The opening chords rang out, the soft sounds of the piano filling the room like a gentle breeze. But as she played, she felt the audience around her, their energy, their presence, connecting with her every note. The music swelled, and so did the visual experience surrounding them. The audience was no longer sitting in rows, watching a performer. They were part of the music, moving through it, feeling it with every step, every breath. As the performance progressed, Sarah saw faces light up with wonder. Some had tears in their eyes. Others stood still, absorbed in the beauty and power of what they were experiencing. For the first time in her career, Sarah felt like she wasn't just performing, she was sharing something profoundly human. By the time the performance reached its emotional peak, Sarah was fully immersed in the experience. The music had become a living, breathing entity, with every person in the room contributing to its energy. The final notes echoed through the space, a delicate piano melody that slowly faded into silence. For a long moment, no one moved. It was as though the world itself had paused. And then, the applause came, not the typical clapping of hands, but a unified expression of appreciation, of connection. The audience had felt something powerful, something real. They hadn't just watched the performance, they had been part of it. After the show, as Sarah stood backstage, she felt a wave of exhaustion, but it was the kind of exhaustion that comes with pouring every ounce of yourself into something. Elon appeared beside her, a look of awe on his face. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You really did it." She smiled, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you, Elon. You were right. It wasn't about perfection. It was about being real." Elon nodded, his eyes softening. "Sometimes, being real is all that matters. The rest will follow." Sarah looked out into the space where the audience had been just moments before. The performance was over, but the impact of what had just occurred would linger, long after the last person had left the venue. This was the beginning of something new. Not just for Sarah, but for the world of music itself. She had taken a leap of faith, stepped into the unknown, and invited people to come along on the journey. And they had followed. Weeks later, as the buzz from the performance slowly settled, Sarah found herself at peace. The critics were still talking, but their words didn't matter as much anymore. She had created something that was bigger than any review, bigger than any performance. She had created a space where people could feel connected, where music could break down walls and bring people together in a way nothing else could. As she sat at her piano, her fingers gently brushing the keys, Sarah realized that this journey was far from over. She had only just begun to scratch the surface of what she could do, of what she could offer the world. The future was still unwritten, and there were countless paths ahead of her. But one thing was certain, she would never stop creating. Not because she had to, but because she couldn't imagine doing anything else. The world had changed, but so had she. And in that transformation, she had found a new purpose, one that went beyond the applause, beyond the spotlight. It was about touching lives, making people feel, and sharing her truth. And as long as she had her music, she knew she would never stop. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?